council chambers. We would like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Inkakatma and the Silk people. Adoption of minutes. Committee of the whole meeting minutes, February 7th, 2023. Recommendation that the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting held on February 7th, 2023 be adopted. Seconder, Councillor Newman, Councillor Egan. Any errors or omissions or any of that? Nope. All those in favor? Opposed? 2.2, Committee of the whole meeting minutes, June 29th, 2022, when we were all here. Recommendation that the minutes of the Committee of the whole meeting held on June 29th, 2022 be adopted.
So moved.
Councillor Newman, Councillor Petrosi, seconds. Any omissions, even though we weren't there? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. No delegations, no unfinished business, new business. Let me turn my page here. 2023-2027 financial plan overview. Ms. Thiessen to provide introduction, and after recommend that this report be received for information. So I'll get that out of the way. Can I have we'll move that this be received for information. Councillor
You've got it.
Olgan. I was going to say dual. Councillor Olgan and Councillor Petrosi. All those in favor? Pass. Ms. Thiessen, over to you, please, on your presentation.
I think we're going to, Sean Smith, the CAO, wants to have a bit of a preamble. So.
Let's do that. I'm just following the procedure.
Yeah, you follow the right procedure.
It's up to you.
Sheila and I take team on this. What I want to do, because Sheila's going to be carrying the budget, is the one that's going to be the primary presenter, the main one asking questions, working through all the budget sheets. But I did want to assist with maybe setting the stage in figuring out how we've got to where we are today and setting a little bit of the overall financial position and set some of the narrative. So I've got a set of sheets in front of you, which is an excerpt from the city's asset management investment plan, as well as 6 years of statements of operations from the annual financial reporting that the city puts out. So there's two numbers on this page that I want to bring your attention to right off the bat within the asset management investment plan. That's the one on the front page there. So in this report, what it did is it looked at every single city asset that we have, ranging from water, wastewater, storm, buildings, vehicles, parks, etc. And it looks at what the asset replacement value of those assets is. So that's what you see in the column to your left. And so in 2016 dollars, the total asset replacement value of everything that the city owned was over $250 million. That was 2016 dollars, and so CPI increases are up about 21.3% since then, and so that number, if it was brought into 2023 terms, is about $303,585,000. So just over $303 million is what we have in assets. The next one that I really want to focus on is you look at the average expected life remaining on those assets is 37%. Now, it's key to understand that that's an average because we have certain assets that the expected life remaining is 0. Yet we're still running them. And that is what constitutes your infrastructure deficit. So if there is an asset that we should have already replaced, theoretically, but we're kind of muddling along, that is what we consider infrastructure deficit, and what you see is backlog, and that was priced at $48 million, which again, multiply that by 21.3%, which I will do right now because you think I would have yeah. I'm impressed that you think that I would have that kind of ability. I would look at Adam and maybe 58.3 million is what we're looking at for infrastructure deficit backlog. Now, to adequately update this, we need to go through an update as part of our asset management planning process, which you've heard about at LGLA. It's pretty critical for us. On top of what we talked about with updating our fee structure, this is another project that I think even before you left, Sheila, was on our radar as a major finance initiative that has to bring in all of the departments because of the variety of assets that we have, to really be able to accurately map when we replace a product, what is happening with our infrastructure deficit up and down, so that we can track that year over year and understand the age, life cycle, and set up better replacement plans for all of these assets. So that's still in the works. Now, the key number that you guys need to focus on from the capital program side is the one in the far right column, which is the average annual life cycle investment. So this is the number that you need to be investing in capital infrastructure every year in order to not be adding to that infrastructure deficit backlog. That's the magic number. So if we're not running a $6 million capital program in 2016 values, which updated to today is 7.274181, we're adding to our infrastructure deficit. That is your magic number. What I can tell you is, we're going to go through the financial statements in a second, we don't get even close. What that means is every year our infrastructure deficit is growing. I'm not trying to make you hit the panic button, but I do want you to understand why it is that we have all of these contextual discussions about tax rates, the need for densification, the need for economic development, and making tough decisions, because at the end of the day, we're falling further behind on infrastructure year over year. So, because we are not allocating $7.274 million into our capital program each year. We don't have enough money. We're not collecting enough revenues to be able to do that, even after accounting for grants. Quite often, we're running something that looks a little bit closer to anywhere between a $3 and a $5 million capital program. So we are not collecting enough revenues between taxation, grants, parcel taxes, all of user fees to address this infrastructure deficit backlog.
I'm just wondering why this hasn't been addressed years ago.
It has, but it's hard because it's balanced against a million different tensions, which, again, are you guys going to come out and say, hey, we're going to solve this for you today? 29% tax increase. No, you're not going to touch that. That's not... We're not able to do that, but there are a lot of levers that we need to be pulling on at the same time, which is what we're doing. It comes with user fees, it comes with grants, it comes with taxation, it comes with non-tax revenue opportunities through economic development. It comes through growing the economic pie through bringing in more opportunities. So we are kind of at a spot where we need to hit all the buttons. So this is not a little bit of taxation here solves the problem. No, we need to be excellent in all of these areas, and we have room to improve. I love where we're going. I love the trajectory, but I will say that the city's been through some difficult times, which is what we're going to show here in the financial statements. And really, we're in the same spot revenue-wise that we were 6 years ago, but we're not in the same spot expense-wise. And so that's what I want to talk through.
One more question.
Please.
How do you compare to other communities?
For infrastructure deficit or underfunding capital programs?
Infrastructure deficit.
So I don't have a specific comparison, but what I will generally say is, compared to small town rural BC, we are all in the exact same boat, unless you have, I'm hesitant to look at Claire, because there are some communities that have a very large industrial base that tends to solve some of this problem. So if you are a Logan Lake or a Princeton or a Trail or something like that, where there's really heavy industry that is kind of backstopping the taxation equation, they're doing okay in terms of infrastructure. There's other places where, because they run like a power authority or some of these other things, where again, the numbers have just made sense over time. So Nelson tends to be doing all right, and they have some unique ways of utilizing their power authority to get out there. So unless you have one of those unique opportunities, this is not an uncommon situation where small town BC is seeing growing infrastructure deficit numbers and does not have the combined revenue between taxation, user fees, et cetera, to be able to offset that. That's part of what Sheila is going to talk about in her presentation, is what proportion of revenue comes from what sources. But definitely want you to be aware of what that overall position is. So I want to start, this is the first in the statement of operations. This is going to show the year 2016, but it also shows 2015 as a comparison. We'll stop here in 3 minutes to grab lunch, and then we'll continue on with the discussion with Sheila. But what I would like you to focus on is that top line, that taxation. It's in this page, it says page 6, but they all say different numbers. So it's the 2016 and 2015 year statement of operations. So in that, you'll see in 2016, there was revenue of 9.176 in the taxation line. That taxation line, when we do it for our annual reporting, also includes parcel taxes. So that's why it's going to be a little bit different than the numbers you see in Sheila's report, because Sheila's report are the raw municipal taxes excluding the parcel tax component. So 9.176, and you'll look down there and you will see in the expenses line where it's totaled, 13,794. So we ran an annual surplus that year of 5.664 million. You need to mentally discount that because the major adjustment here was the prior year gas tax, and there's some notes in the financial statements of about 2.6 million. So roughly half of that surplus is explained by a one-time transfer because of an accounting item that was being addressed, but really we were running a $2.6 million surplus that year. The year before, we ran a $1.729 million surplus, and think of that as your transfer to capital. So that's where we need to get to this number, leveraged against what we get from grants. Because if you have a dollar that is coming in surplus, so let's say we have a number of 4 million in surplus, we're very likely going to get grants that make those dollars go further. So if we are running, let's say, the Vote Street project and we're successful in getting that and it's 73% funded, then we might only be using 2.4 million of the city's money, and we might be using $6 million of the province's or the federal government's money in order to get to the spot where we can hit that 7.2 number with less dollars. But on average, what I'll say is we really need to be funding about half the cost of that capital program. It goes up and down year over year, but we need to be roughly funding 3 million of city dollars into our capital plan in order to get to the spot where we're going to be able to get anywhere near that $7.24 million to address. I'm just setting these up as general targets. They're not must hits, but this is kind of what we look at in trying to get this infrastructure built and developed. So 2016, obviously significantly growing taxation year over year from 2015. Now turn the page and look from 2016 to 17, and again, you're going to see a major bump on revenue on that side. And you'll see it both in the user fee side as well as on the taxation side, such that we brought in 19 million total revenue, and we had 13.9 million of expenses for an annual surplus of 5.2 million that year. This was pretty close to the stars aligning, where we still had TOLCO. There was no tax revitalization exemptions that had kicked in yet, and we were in a lower cost environment for a whole bunch of our services. Most notably, RCMP increase in costs hadn't yet happened yet. And so in that year, we ran a fairly legitimate $5.2 million funding of our capital plan. And that's the last really good news story, because from there the number starts to change, and I just want to share the story as to why. So in 2018, our taxation continued to increase, but not nearly as fast as our expenses started to increase. So we started seeing fairly significant rise in costs across the board for the services that we provide. and our user fee values came down. We tried figuring out exactly what the metric for why user fees came down in that year, but I don't have a specific answer for you. What I can say is you'll note that our annual surplus started to shrink that year, and still at a healthy level, but started to shrink. And then 2019 is when you'll see a major difference. So if you'll note the taxation difference between 2018, where we were bringing in over 10 million in taxation between parcel taxes and raw taxation, 2019 we're down to 9.166. So we're down about $1 million in just off the top in taxation. Also down in user fees. So this is the year where Toko was fully decommissioned, so they came off our books. As well, this was the year that the tax revitalization exemption for what at the time was Merritt Green Energy kicked in, which is like $700,000. It's not an insignificant sum, given the utility tax rates, kicked in. So what I want you guys to look at is where that put us because of rising expenses and the hit that we had to taxation in other areas, where that puts us in surplus for 2019. Anybody want to pull that figure out? $640,000. Anybody see any problems there? Okay. I don't care how good we are at grants and turning money into more money, we are never going to get where we need to be with a surplus of $640,000. Now, the one thing that I will note is amortization is baked into here, and amortization is actually going to help this equation because we are building into our financial equations roughly $2.5 million of capital depreciation every year, which does funnel back into the capital plan, but we'll talk about that. It's a concept that I swear I need explained to me every single year, so I don't blame you when you want to understand how depreciation works. But no matter where we fall, surplus too small in 2019. 2020, we have another scenario where taxation is on the way up again, and we're going to be building from there. Major contributor here is that every year we step up, a portion of Merritt Green Energy's tax revitalization drops off. So this year they're now only getting a 75% exemption instead of a 100% exemption. With the way things played out there, we're up to a $2 million surplus again, getting more healthy. And then 2021, flood year, really messed with a lot of the numbers, so you need to take this with something of a grain of salt. Taxation is up, user fees were up, so we did what we need to do on that side, but because of all of the additional expenses that came with the flood management, but it's largely offset by, you'll see a quite substantial government grants and transfers number there of 7.2 million. We have much higher revenue, also had much higher expenses, and still came out at an annual surplus of about 815,000. What we need to do in order to smooth this out is bring that annual surplus back to the mark where plus depreciation, we're getting closer to funding this to the tune of about $2.5 million. That's the sweet spot where we want to be in that ballpark over time, where we can regularly be transferring about 2.5 to our capital program, plus the depreciation amount, which leveraged against grants will get us in the ballpark of this 7.24. That's just some of the context that I wanted to set up for you guys, so you have a backdrop when you're making operating decisions. Know that every operating decision is ultimately going to change the flow through for what happens on the capital side in addressing that infrastructure backlog. So with that, I propose that we let council get lunch, and then it'll be Sheila afterwards.
Adjourn to lunch.